Simone, and I'm the neighborhood librarian here at Cliff Wright Library. So welcome to Sustainability Speaker Series, and thank you again for coming out today. So before we begin, we are gathered here today on Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis. On behalf of the Saskatoon Public Library, we pay respect to the Indigenous ancestors of this place. As an organization that played an important role in the settlement of Saskatoon, and as a key memory institution, we acknowledge our responsibility to respond in meaningful ways to the calls to action. The program tonight can only happen because of the partnership the library has with the Saskatchewan Environmental Society. We work hard to find knowledgeable speakers month after month. So today I'm going to invite Carol here from the Saskatchewan Environmental Society to come up and introduce tonight's speakers.
Good evening. My name is Carol, and I'm a volunteer with the Saskatchewan Environmental Society. Since 1970, the Environmental Society has been working on a wide range of environmental issues, including climate change, renewable energy generation, opposition to nuclear power development, protection of Saskatchewan's waters, and preservation of important wild spaces and habitat. We invite you to become a member of the Environmental Society. The Saskatchewan Environmental Society's newsletter, The Environmental Resource, has information on ways the Society is working towards a world in which all needs can be met in sustainable ways. You can sign up to receive the newsletter at the website environmentalsociety.ca. Our speakers this evening are Matthew Dipple and Riley Fitzsimmons. Both are professional engineers. Matthew Dipple is a certified passive house consultant. He is co-owner of Airtight Engineering, a Saskatchewan-based consulting firm specializing in energy modeling and mechanical design for energy-efficient buildings. Matthew has worked on numerous design projects in which have utilized heat pumps on the Canadian prairies. Riley Fitzsimmons works as a building systems consultant with Airtight Engineering. He provides energy modeling and consulting services. He transitioned from civil engineering consulting to a career in building science after designing and moving into his own net zero house with a heat pump in 2021. The title of their presentation is Heat Pumps in Saskatchewan, a Practical Primer.
All right, so we've had our introductions already, so I'll just breeze past these two slides. Riley's going to start for us. He's going to talk about what is a heat pump, how does it work. We've got what's hopefully a pretty interactive video to kind of show how a heat pump works. And Riley's going to share some of his experience then with his own home, having a heat pump in it. And then I'll take over and we'll go through some frequently asked questions about heat pumps here in Saskatchewan. And if we have time at the end, we've got a few additional details for sort of the practical implications of how to install a heat pump or how to retrofit a heat pump into an existing home. So if we have time, we'll talk about some of those too. And after that, we would love your questions as well. So take it away, Riley.
All right. Good evening, everyone. First, we're going to go through what is a heat pump. So a heat pump is a mechanical device that forces heat to move from one space to another. A heat pump doesn't generate heat itself, and it uses the physics of pressure differences and the transitions between liquid and gas state of a fluid to do this. So this is a diagram. It's a little bit complicated, but this is how your traditional air conditioner would work. So we have on the inside of the house an inside coil. People often think that is blowing cold air or providing cold air itself, but it's actually removing heat from the inside. That then goes through a compressor, which sends the refrigerant to the outdoor coil. And then that kind of exhausts the heat from inside the house to the outdoors. And the refrigerant continues around, goes back inside to collect more heat, and then in a cycle like that. So there's roughly 4 stages. you can kind of see in each of the four corners either a high or low pressure or a high or low temperature, and it switches between vapor and liquid. So heat pumps, it's kind of a term that's thrown around for devices that can both heat and cool, but heat pumps can only go in one direction, and I'll show some examples of those. But this is a heat pump in the heating cycle. It's effectively the same thing, just with refrigerant flowing in reverse, switched by that reversing valve that's in the middle. So in this case, it's removing heat from the outdoors and forcing it inside the house through that same cycle with pressure differences, temperature differences, and transitions between liquid and vapor. Here's a quick little video of kind of using real world examples of how that works. And there you have it. Hopefully that was a little bit more kind of plain language of how a heat pump works. This one is just an example. There's different kind of sources and destinations of the heat. This is an example of a heat pump water heater. So here it's taking warm air, taking the heat from that, and then forcing it into the water so that it can be used as hot water in a house. And there's an example of my own later on that we'll talk about. So heat pumps in homes. You're probably, first, so where do homes use the most energy? You can go to the next one. So you can see this is a graph of residential energy use in Canada from 2019. You can see by a large majority, space heating is the biggest user of energy in residential homes, followed by water heating and appliances closely behind that, and then a little bit on lighting and space cooling. And what's cool about that is we can use heat pumps in a significant portion of those energy uses. And like that video mentioned, with very high efficiencies, that often leads to energy use reductions. So you all very likely have a heat pump in your home already. Fridges and freezers are heat pumps. They take heat from inside the fridge or freezer and force it outside. So you might notice sometimes if you're walking by your fridge or freezer, it kind of feels warm on the outside, and that's exactly how it's supposed to work. It's taking the heat energy from the inside so that it can keep your food cold or frozen, and forcing it outside so it stays at a relatively constant temperature inside. Of course, there's heating and cooling as well. Many people also likely have an air conditioner unit in their house, and again, that's another example. It's taking heat from inside and forcing it outside. Two more, or I guess less common devices, they're a little newer in the market, but becoming more popular, are heat pump water heaters and heat pump clothes dryers. So like I mentioned before, the water heater, it takes heat from the air. It's often inside the house and forces it into the water, so it can be used as hot water. And then the clothes dryer, it basically takes heat from the air around it, similar to the water heater, forces it through, flows it through the drum for drying, and then kind of has its own cycle in that. So it's more efficient than taking air from inside the house, heating it up, and spitting it outside. It sort of keeps that same air in the house and just uses this technology to warm it up and dry the clothes. So what's exciting about heat pumps? Like that video mentioned, efficiency is the biggest one. So we can see here the typical older gas furnaces or boilers. Efficiency ranges is between 55 and 80%. That's fairly poor. And it's, I guess, efficiency means the energy in versus energy out. So if you have an old furnace, say is 70% efficient, you're only kind of making use of 70% of that fuel that you're putting in. Going up the graph, we have kind of a newer efficient wood stove. It's about 80% efficient. The high efficiency gas furnaces or boilers are somewhere around 97. So still not quite getting all that energy. Electric furnaces and baseboards that are 100% efficient. So they effectively convert all the energy that's fed into them into heat. But then we get into heat pumps. In the prairies here, we usually say an air source heat pump, which means the heat pump is taking its heat from the air outside. It's around 200% efficient, and that's to kind of balance out the loss in efficiency as the outdoor temperature goes lower. On the other hand, for a ground source heat pump, it's taking its heat from the ground. Of course, the ground stays relatively constant throughout the year. So with a more constant source of heat, the efficiencies can be much higher. And this is for water heaters. So similar kind of ladder, natural gas with a tank. It's kind of got a pretty broad range, but still it's burning natural gas to heat water. So it's a little more or a little less efficient. The tankless ones are a little bit more on the efficient side. And then the electric ones, both tank and tankless, have losses from just holding water. The tank holds that water and can lose thermal energy outside the tank. Obviously, tankless one doesn't have that issue, but there's still some losses in the system there. And then with the heat pumps, again, you see a huge jump in efficiency. The hybrid heat pumps, that's got both a heat pump on top, like the picture on the right there, and it also has an electric element in the bottom, so that if there's a period of high demand, it can turn on the electric element and you're not kind of waiting hours for hot water again. A CO2 heat pump uses CO2 as a refrigerant. So it's much less of a kind of global warming risk. A lot of refrigerants are fairly potent on the global warming global warming potential. So the CO2 ones definitely reduce that risk if there's any leakage of refrigerant. So on the right, you can see this is kind of the average use per appliance for a 4-person household. You can see, and you likely might be aware that an air conditioner can kind of run up the electricity bill fairly quickly. So of course, with our hot summers, that's top of the list. Next is stove, an electric stove top from cooking. And then the third one there is a dryer. So clothes dryers effectively work, like I mentioned, by heating the air that's inside the house, blowing it through the drum with the clothes, and then exhausting it outside. Heat pump dryers, on the other hand, they still take air from the house, but they force heat into it. I'm thinking now I should have had a picture of what the cycle looks like, but they blow the hot air through the drum. The cooling side of the cycle is still within the dryer. So the cooling side takes that warm, moist air, condenses out the moisture, which then can drain out of the unit, and then kind of goes back to the heating side, gets heated up again, and it cycles around like that. So it's sort of an all-enclosed system. It uses air from inside the house, or the heat that's inside the house already, and just kind of forces it to warm up and cool down in a cycle without blowing out any nice warm air into the cold winter night. These usually use half the energy of a standard electric dryer, but it does often take longer to dry just based on that lower kind of maximum heat threshold. So of course, like the ones we mentioned, most are probably familiar with having an air conditioner. An air conditioner is essentially, or a heat pump is essentially an air conditioner that can be reversed. And these have several different sources and distribution types. So the sources we've kind of gone through. There's air source. So those are ones that are outside, exposed to the outside air. And they're kind of sensitive to those temperature fluctuations. They're more efficient when the temperature spread between the outside and inside is less. There's ground source. So this is like a geothermal energy system. It's taking the heat from within the ground, which is less impacted by our seasonal swings in temperature. And then there's water source, which takes heat from a flowing water source. And those can often be the most efficient and less at risk of things like freezing up. Ground source ones, the ground almost acts as a battery. So you have to be mindful that you're not depleting that battery. And often that means kind of pumping more heat into the ground than your cooling needs in your house would typically do. Inside, there's different distribution types. Most are probably familiar with air-based, so a forced air kind of furnace. There's hydronic, so these are essentially like cooled floors, it's more like, I guess, a water-based system running through the house. And then there's ductless. So this is just like a wall-mounted unit on the side, and it directly connects to an outdoor unit. And it blows air out of the wall-mounted unit and circulates throughout the room. So heat pumps in my house. This is a picture of my house. The EnerGuide rating or audit rating of 0 confirms that it is a net zero house. We moved in November 2021 and have been quite happy with it. we've got actually collected more heat pumps. I guess just one extra since we moved in, but the different systems. So this is our Carrier Infinity heat pump that provides both space heating and cooling. So we call this kind of our primary heating and cooling system. There's a electric furnace backup. So when it gets lower than -15 outside, the furnace will kick in and provide heat as needed. The control system that comes with this package is very intelligent, and it'll kind of split the duties between the heat pump and the furnace as it needs to. You'll see on a couple other sides, I have the set point go lower in the nighttime and then raise up again in the morning. So if it's depending on the outside temperature, that morning shift, often it'll trigger both the heat pump and the furnace to run at the same time, so that it can kind of meet that couple degree bump in temperature demand. And one of the great features I like, sorry Matt, is that it's got staged operation. So it has a VFD or a variable frequency drive, in that it can run kind of at different speeds. So when, like today, it was not much above 20. And to be honest, I doubt that my heat pump would have run. But if it did, it would only need to run at a very low speed. So it's not frequently kind of turning off and on, going full blast and then off and full blast and off. So we're quite happy with the system. For water heating, we have a Rheem, it's a long name there, Professional Prestige ProTerra Hybrid Electric Heat Pump. So this is essentially like the diagrams we showed. It forces heat from the air, in this case inside my mechanical room, into the water inside the tank, and then that gets sent throughout the house. It's a hybrid one, so there is like a high demand mode. And you can schedule it. So for mornings, for example, I put in to run at high demand mode for a few hours, just so it, with everyone showering, it doesn't run out of hot water. The unit does need space for efficient airflow. So you can see on the right there's a grill for a fan. That's the exhaust fan, and then the intake's on the top. So you don't want to keep it in so tight quarters that it's kind of short-circuiting, blowing cold air out and then kind of sucking that same air back in. The unit is a little bit noisy. It's honestly not very noticeable when you're just kind of living in the house, but if you're going in the mechanical room and spending a bit of time in there doing whatever you need to do, it can get a little bit annoying, but in an enclosed room, it's not too bad. So quite fond of that system as well. So this is the new edition heat pump. We got this, it would have been just this winter actually. We had a full electric clothes dryer, and like I mentioned, we noticed fairly high energy uses both with the electric dryer operation itself, but especially in the winter time, it's blowing out that hot air that we just spent a whole bunch of energy heating up, and then some cold outside air has to come in and take the space of that hot air that we sent out. So this is a GE Profile combo washer dryer. Capacity isn't as big as some units, but we find it kind of meets our needs right now. One big feature is it only has a 120 volt plug, so you can essentially put it anywhere. It doesn't need the 220 volt like a standard electric dryer would. This unit uses high airflow to improve drying time, so we end up with roughly 2.5 hours to wash and dry a load. We have found we can't essentially overload it. If we do, it does extend the drying time drastically, but it still gets a reasonable amount of clothes clean and dry in a timely manner. We have noticed a decrease in energy use. And like I mentioned, it's not just the more efficient heat pump, it's also not tossing out that hot air as well. So just more details. When we were building, we had actually initially planned to just do a high efficiency natural gas service with an air conditioner. So during the build, we kind of changed our mind on that. And as a result, we were able to essentially get an upgrade cost for that. So it was about nearly 14,000 in early 2021. And that included both the water heater and the space heat system. I do think with that being kind of the heart of COVID time, it probably was a little bit inflated in price. I would guess that these days that number would probably be decreased a bit. The added comfort, like I mentioned with the space heating and cooling, because it's a modulating system, it maintains a set point at a quiet load speed. So it doesn't, like I mentioned, turn on at full blast and off at full blast. Same with the furnace. It can operate at a lower speed just to kind of keep that set point where it should be rather than sort of bouncing up and down. I guess one of the things with comfort, the more robust envelope definitely helps with that too. So it keeps the heat and the cold in wherever we want it. And after the slide, I'll kind of show a graph of what happens through the days. The outlet temperature isn't extreme as a gas furnace would be. I remember as a kid, if we woke up in the morning, our feet were cold, we'd go and sit down in the kitchen and put it right against the register for the furnace because it would blow in nice hot air. With the electric furnace, it'll blow hot air like that, but with the heat pump, it doesn't blow quite as hot of air. It's still warm, but you won't get your feet warmed up really quick with that. And that's just it's running to meet the demand. It's not blasting hot air and not modulating. Heat pumps, like space heating heat pumps, should be watched for ice buildup. They have a defrost cycle in the winter, so that will basically remove condensation on the outdoor unit, and it'll run, I don't know, every half an hour or something like that. Some kind of reverse the cycle to melt any ice, and some have integrated kind of heating coils. I've found that ours has been pretty good, other than when we have like a blizzard with a bunch of snow kind of being forced onto or at the unit or into the unit. Sometimes I got to go out and kind of knock the ice off the sides. So that is one consideration that you got to be more attentive with. So this is a graph. Unfortunately, I could only get it from, I think this was the first week of May, the 1st of May to the 8th or so. I was just going through my kind of home automation system and noticed this graph. So you can see effectively on most days, the heating system barely has to run. And of course, this is kind of the shoulder season, so the outdoor temperature doesn't fluctuate a whole lot. But this is where you can see those different set point steps. So on the left side, you can see the kind of shaded red underneath where the set point for the heat goes up, which is the red line. those are really the only times the heating system has run that week. And then the shaded blue, that's the only time that the cooling system had run. So if you remember the weekend before last, it was fairly toasty. But you can see my house kind of kept the temperature fairly bearable, and then kind of halfway later in the day, the cooling system kicked on to keep it below that set point. But just kind of an interesting graph. We had to throw at least one in there. We are engineers after all. But I found it pretty neat that my system could kind of keep track of that. So what's exciting about heat pumps? Number one, of course, is the efficiency. Like we mentioned, can be up to 300 to 400% efficient. And it's because it's only moving heat. It's not generating heat on its own. The versatility. So we talked about several different appliances where heat pumps are or can be used. And of course, the opportunity for electrification. With a house like mine, I can't get net zero energy if I'm burning natural gas. So if I can directly offset the electrical energy by generating it from the sun, that's how we can get to net zero energy use.
Awesome. Thanks, Riley. Okay, let's talk about some questions that we often get asked about heat pumps. So first question that people ask, do heat pumps work in Saskatchewan? So hopefully Riley has dispelled the myth that floats around that heat pumps do not work in Saskatchewan. I also included here some pictures of other projects that we've worked on that have heat pumps. Some of you might be familiar with the Radiance co-housing in Saskatoon, which is heated and cooled using heat pumps. This is Cumberland House band office, which is pretty far up north. And then this is a greenhouse in Montreal Lake, which is even further north in Saskatchewan. So we've used lots of heat pumps, lots of places. I will say that in Saskatchewan, as Riley mentioned on his house, we need a backup system often. So heat pumps have gotten much better in cold temperatures. Cold climate versions can run down to -25 or -30, but we still have days here on the prairies where it gets below -30. So we want to make sure we've got some sort of backup. The good thing is our backup system doesn't need to be particularly spectacular in terms of efficiency because it's only going to get used a little bit of the year. So that's kind of air source heat pumps. Ground source heat pumps work in any climate because the ground is not going to be -30. Another question we often get asked is, will a heat pump save money and emissions in Saskatchewan? So the answer to that is it depends. The sort of classic engineer's answer, which everyone hates. You pay us a fee and then we just tell you it depends. But I did a little just kind of like mini study to just look at this, and I looked at 3 different scenarios. So I looked at a house that was sort of typical pre-1980s house. So you don't have to know exactly what these numbers mean. Just know that 90 watts per meter squared of heating load, that house requires a fair amount of heat. Then we've got a modern, generally efficient house. It's going to be at 45. So it's like half of our pre-1980s house. And this is like decently efficient. So it's not just code minimum. It's slightly better than code minimum, but not as good as, say, a net zero house. And then a modern best-in-class house, this would be like Riley's house, for example. So it's down at like 30 watts per meter squared. So I looked at 3 different houses in terms of efficiency. Then I also looked at 3 different scenarios. So the first was just natural gas furnace. The second was a heat pump with natural gas furnace as a backup. So we talked about how we need backup heat. And then the third was heat pump with electric backup. So this is like Riley's system. It's all electric. There's no gas there anymore. So looking at those 3 levels of efficiency in those 3 different heating systems, we can try and figure out, are there any cases where heat pumps save us money and save emissions, or are there any cases where they don't versus just a natural gas baseline? Okay, here's my pretty pictures. Okay, so in terms of money, really what it comes down to is the best-in-class home could have lower utility costs if the carbon tax returns. So without a carbon tax, the problem that we face is even though heat pumps are way more efficient than natural gas furnaces, natural gas is so much cheaper than electricity here in the province that you just aren't going to save money. So natural gas currently without any carbon tax is like, I think it's like 7 times cheaper, 6 or 7 times cheaper than electricity. Well, if you've got a heat pump that's 200% efficient, it's twice as efficient as natural gas, but natural gas is 7 times cheaper. So it's still going to be cheaper to run a natural gas appliance. The one case where that changes, one of them is if the carbon tax returns, and another is if we've got a super efficient house like Riley's, and we can get to the point where we can actually get rid of the natural gas service altogether. So not only do we not have to pay for the gas, but we don't have to pay the like $25 a month of service fee, then we can get to the point where it does make sense financially. It is going to pay back. So that's one scenario where it makes sense economically. Another scenario is if you've got solar PV, where you can offset your utility costs with your heat pumps. That's another case where your air source heat pump would save you money versus just natural gas. So the economics are tough here versus even say our neighbors in Manitoba, where they've got very cheap power versus natural gas. So that's the hard truth about saving money. Something else that I'd like to mention though is if you've got a really efficient home, let's say you've got a house like Riley's or like Radiant's co-housing or a passive house or something, it could be that your heating system is small enough and your heating costs are low enough that you don't actually care if it's more expensive. So let's say you're living in a passive house, maybe you would spend $8 a month on natural gas to heat your house. So maybe you actually don't care if your heat pump costs you 3.5 times what your natural gas costs you, and you're paying 30 or 40 bucks a month instead of $8 a month. Maybe say, honestly, no big deal. If you've got a very inefficient house, your pre-1980s home, maybe you're spending $150 a month. Well, certainly you wouldn't want to see that go up to $300 or $400 a month. So those are some economics for you for heat pumps. So our next question is, will an air source heat pump save emissions in Saskatchewan? So our answer again, we'll start with it depends, and then we'll flesh that out. Currently, in 2025, a heat pump will not reduce your home's greenhouse gas emissions if you're using grid power. So if you've got solar panels, then yes, you'll be saving emissions versus natural gas. If you don't, if you're just using Sask Energy's grid power, then it will not save any emissions. And that's because the grid still has enough coal on it that it'll be dirtier than burning natural gas. A couple of caveats to that. Number one, I recently learned that SaskPower actually has a program where you can purchase renewable power off their system. So like renewable power credits, essentially. So you pay a slightly higher cost for your power, and then they'll sort of allocate credits to the renewable generation that they have available. So that's kind of cool. That could be one option for addressing your greenhouse gas emissions with your heat pump. And then the other thing is by 2030, SaskPower's current plan is to get rid of the rest of their coal generation, their conventional coal. So close the last of the conventional coal power plants, in which case, once those close, then you'll actually save a significant amount of emissions using a heat pump. So 1/2 to 2/3 of your home's emissions would be saved going to a heat pump from natural gas. So having said that, it's been in the news recently that the provincial government is instructing SaskPower to look at keeping those gas power plants open beyond the current planned retirement date before 2030. So if that happens, if those coal power plants stay online, then we've got a problem in terms of saving greenhouse gas emissions with a heat pump. So some key takeaways on these last few slides. I want to note that building efficiently makes a huge difference. So part of why Riley can do what he does in his house is because he's got a really efficient house. It would make no sense and it'd be really hard for him to afford to run his house if it were just built to the minimum building code. So heat pumps are awesome, but we always like to talk about the importance of the building and of making your house more efficient. So that's a really important thing. Also, cost and carbon, they're both in this gray zone, this it depends zone. So cost, well, kind of isn't in that zone anymore now that the carbon tax is gone. But for carbon emissions, we're definitely kind of close to that point in the next couple of years where a heat pump will use less carbon than natural gas, as long as those coal-fired power plants still continue the way that they're going. So something that we do want to consider is we're trying to predict and plan for a system that's going to last for 15 plus years, maybe 20, maybe 25. So we don't want to just say, oh, well, a heat pump doesn't save me greenhouse gas emissions today in 2025, so I'm not going to put one in. We want to say, hey, this system's going to be in my house for a long time. So I'm trying to predict the future to some extent and say, over the life of the system, how much is it going to save in terms of carbon emissions or in terms of cost? And we haven't considered lots of other things when we're trying to answer these questions. So I just did a pretty basic preliminary look at things. I didn't look at really optimizing a whole heck of a lot. Also, we have areas of the province where there's not natural gas service available. So if you're living in a community where there's no gas service, where you have to burn propane or heating oil or wood, then a heat pump makes sense for sure, like right out of the gate. We haven't talked too much about offsetting ice. We talked a little bit about offsetting with solar energy. So that certainly changes our metrics. And we've also got geothermal heat pumps or ground source heat pumps that we could use too, which are going to change those parameters too. So question, how much does a heat pump cost? You saw how much Riley's cost. And a couple notes here, ground source initial cost is much more expensive, and this is because the ground loop is very expensive. Also, it's really hard to do in an urban environment because you have to try to like get a drilling rig or an excavator or something into a yard and work around existing utilities. So often we would mostly just see ground source in rural locations, so on farms or acreages. It's not that it's impossible in the city, but it's going to be a lot more difficult. And then there's that initial cost too. So it's more efficient, but you're going to pay for that initially putting in the piping into the ground. For an air source, the unit itself can range from $1,000 for simple 1-ton unit. So a lot of people, their air conditioner might be around 2 tons. So just to give you a sense of scale, so 1-ton unit to maybe more like 8,000 for a 5-ton unit, could be upwards of 10 or 12,000 for sort of the fanciest cold climate, biggest, fanciest units. That's just for the unit itself. I've talked to a mechanical contractor in Saskatoon recently. He was saying that they usually charge like, I think it was $1,800 for all of the refrigerant piping and installation of the system. And then they would have, additional costs for any additional ductwork and stuff like that. The city of Saskatoon has been doing for the last number of years an awesome home energy loan program. And something great that this has done for the market in Saskatoon is it's given an opportunity for contractors to get more familiar with heat pumps because more and more homeowners are getting heat pumps installed in their existing homes. So something that the city found was that in the first year of their home energy loan program, the average heat pump installation in an existing home cost about $10,000. In the second year of the program, it was down to $6,600. And that's because the contractors are more familiar with it. So they aren't having to price in the risk of, oh my goodness, I've never done this before. What happens if something goes wrong? They're able to price it as if they were installing an air conditioner, essentially. So that's something that's been great with the initiative that the city took there and is a big help for homeowners in the city. A couple other notes, I mentioned this, but cold climate versions of heat pumps. So when they've got the ability to run down to really low temperatures, Often they're going to cost a little bit more for that added functionality. And then mini split systems, or often they're called ductless heat pumps. Those are the ones with just the kind of the head mounted on the wall, high up on the wall, blowing heating or cooling air. Those are usually less expensive than a central heat pump that you would have installed in your furnace. So another question people ask, can I retrofit my house with a heat pump? And the answer to this one is not. It depends. It is yes. So there are certainly considerations, but yeah, you can, in theory, anyone could retrofit their house with a heat pump. So I mentioned earlier, it's most effective to improve the building envelope first. So we want to improve our efficiency. That's always the most cost effective. And also it's going to lead to the best comfort for us. And then once we've done that, we can look at installing a heat pump. Something else to ask is, do you have a furnace or hydronic heat? So do you have a boiler with radiators or in-floor, or do you have a furnace and forced air? Because that is going to change the type of heat pump you get. So a furnace, you're going to get an air-to-air heat pump. So it's taking heat from the outside air and putting it into air inside in your furnace. Versus hydronic, if you've got a boiler, you're going to get an air-to-water heat pump. Or maybe you would choose a mini split, a ductless heat pump. So air to water is essentially, it's like a heat pump boiler. So it's going to heat up water that could then get sent to radiators or to in-floor, and then it'll cool that water as well. So that's kind of another consideration. And one more consideration is, do you want to keep your natural gas backup? So if you have a house that is, maybe you've done some work and it's decently efficient, but not, it's no net zero home by any means, you might choose to keep your natural gas furnace as your backup heat source. And then you can choose when you want to switch over from the heat pump heating to the furnace heating. So maybe that heat pump can run down to -25, but maybe, it's just not efficient enough below -15 that it makes sense to keep that running versus running your natural gas furnace. And so that is called a dual fuel approach. So we're using natural gas or electricity. Also, then you have the option too in the future to actually, like, as electricity and gas prices change, you can decide to change your set point and run on gas more or less of the time and electricity more or less of the time. So that's another consideration. Something else that's worth considering is just the grid impact. So if you're in an existing neighborhood, sometimes the electricity grid is a little bit limited. And so if we've got a natural gas furnace as our backup, that is going to be helpful for the grid, because then during the coldest days of the year, where the grid is kind of more stressed, it's got more demands on it, you can be running your gas furnace and there's lots of capacity on the gas grid. So you can sort of alleviate some of that stress on the grid. So that's one other consideration when you're retrofitting with a heat pump. Okay, I see. I'm going to just take maybe 2 more minutes, and then I think we're probably at a good spot. Just a couple additional details. I'll talk through these fairly quickly, but just some things to note. One thing when you're retrofitting is that the system design is important. It's not the same as putting a furnace in, because the capacity of that heat pump changes as the outdoor temperature changes. So it's more important that that system is designed well. So we want to rely on our mechanical contractors or mechanical designers or engineers. And heat pumps need more airflow from an air handler than a natural gas furnace. So Riley was talking about how the heat pump in his home produces a lower temperature than the old gas furnace. So it's still heating the home, but it's not blasting out 50-degree air. Maybe it's putting out 35 or 40-degree air. So because of that, we need a little bit more air to move the same amount of heat. So something that our mechanical contractor should be doing is checking the size of our ductwork to make sure that our ductwork is sized so that it can actually handle the amount of air the heat pump needs to move. And just a couple of tips when heating with a heat pump. I say don't lower the set point of your heat pump for energy savings. You can do it for comfort, but it's not going to save energy the same way as lowering the set point for your gas furnace. So we saw that in the graph that Riley showed, where he actually, every time in the morning that his set point goes back up from say 18 degrees to 20 degrees. Then his heat pump kicks in, but his electric furnace also has to kick in to try to meet that extra load. So a heat pump system is really designed to just run slow and steady, kind of keep a constant temperature, not ramp up, not ramp down too much. And so keeping our set point at an even temperature is going to be helpful. So running on low all the time, some people think, man, my heat pump is running all the time. What's going on? Something's wrong. Actually, no, that's a sign that it's working well, because it should be running on a low speed all the time. That's when it's happiest. And we already talked about the last point there. And the last thing that I'm going to talk about, and then we'll open it up to questions, is natural gas heat pumps. So you can actually get a natural gas heat pump. And at this point, just to give you a little bit of a lowdown on them, my understanding is that Sask Energy is doing some testing of them. I would not say these are like commercial production ready in terms of, like, there are units available for sale, but there isn't enough of a, in my opinion, there's not enough of a service industry available yet that this would be as reliable of an option as an electric heat pump. So this is a pretty complex piece of equipment compared to electric heat pump in that it's different, right? It's using a different technology, whereas an electric heat pump is the same air conditioning technology that we've all had in our homes for decades and decades. So this is something that's new on the market. It'll be interesting. We'll see where it goes. Definitely doesn't get as efficient as an electric heat pump, but it's running off of natural gas versus electricity. So interesting to see sort of where this goes. I'm keeping my eye on it, but I'm not including these in residential designs at this point. There's also the question of, if we're moving towards net zero, is this more of a bridge technology than sort of a final destination? So how much is this going to kind of move us in a path that's helpful in the short term, but maybe less where we're trying to go in the long term? Okay, and that's it.